Um, okay, I'm going to launch into it and imagine that people who are joining late will catch up, and hope that that works out. Hi, I'm Tamsin Wu, and I'm the tech lead for the Comet project. And this is a workshop on how workflow works in Comet. The context here is that the Surfliner team has been building out support for the configurable workflow engine in Comet, and we want to launch the process of figuring out how campuses will actually make use of that engine. But we're finding that talking about workflow using the terminology that we use in the team is a little bit hard, and that stakeholders don't really have a grounding in what the workflow engine can do or how it can influence how they think about handling of digital materials. So we're interested in helping to provide some of that grounding. We think the workflow engine is super powerful, and we're hoping that this session will give folks, at least begin the process of giving folks the tools to think about how they can use it, and therefore make it easier for them to give us feedback about designing workflows, about improving how the engine makes its actions available, and so on. So this is, from at least from my perspective, this is really uh, about getting people on the same page with what's here and how we're thinking about uh, workflow. Okay, so I'll start with what's Comet. Um, Comet's the staff-facing digital object management system is the terminology we use. We're interested in content that we consider to be quote unquote under management being in Comet, um, and having that content's management tracked by Comet. Comet is intended to manage a variety of aspects of those objects, including identity, the storage of the files, um, metadata, and structural relationships and access controls, and some other things as well. I don't want to dwell on this like high level what is Comet too long, but there is a Comet features list and a Comet implementation status page linked. If you're needing these slides, you can get them at the bit.ly link or by scanning the QR code. I added a QR code thinking that there might be people in a room, but I don't think there is. So these links are active. You can click through on them and see the features and implementation status info for more information about what Comet is scoped to do. Comet fits into a broader digital library architecture that's being developed by the Surfliner team, and this broader architecture supports different storage management, preservation, and access functions. And the team is sort of trying to grow and evolve this architecture in a holistic way, but step by step. So the way that Comet fits into the bigger picture is that it's meant to be the one point of control for object identity, metadata, and access control, and that then matters like discovery, indexing, and actually making objects available to the public are sort of external to that and can evolve at a different pace than the management functionality. Okay, that's Surfliner. Comet, because Comet's interested in tracking what an object does as it moves through its life cycle, there's sort of this core functionality to it about the object workflow that once Comet actually sees the object, what happens to it and what steps it will go through. So a workflow in the conception that I want to talk about here is a part of the object of the broader object lifecycle, and it defines what steps are managed or tracked through Comet as an object moves through that life cycle, and which users can perform which actions during the life cycle. Workflows are configurable and customizable per campus. They're reusable for many different projects on each campus, and I'll say more about projects later, but involving different staff members who might be moving different objects through workflows. And then importantly, workflows are tracked for individual objects. So each individual object in Comet is going to be in a particular state inside of its workflow at any given moment. But most commonly, we think users will actually move objects through the workflow in batch. So you apply workflow actions to large groups of objects in the normal case. But again, they're tracked independently, so it's possible to have objects in various workflow states at various times. And this on the right side is just like a very simple workflow diagram. I'm going to unpack all the details here in just a little bit, but you can start to see the overall structure of how these things are put together. You have a set of states, actions that can be performed for those states, roles that perform the actions, and then some things that might happen as a side effect when the action is performed. Again, I'm going to come back to that. So workflows are, again, just a piece of the overall picture of how an object might move through a life cycle as the library is handling it. The scope of what Comet should be tracking is one of the questions that we're most interested in having stakeholder input about answering. So we think, for instance, that that if I'm, say, just as an example, if I'm doing digital production in a lab, I'm moving materials through a scanner or photographing them, that there are some steps in that process that are going to be external to Comet, and that there are some steps in that process that are going to be managed very specifically by Comet or even performed by Comet. So as examples, we think that Comet's a good place to do things like quality assurance for metadata, quality assurance for file content, fixity checking, permanent ID minting, certain automated steps like transcoding or OCR generation. And importantly, in the context of the broader digital library system, Comet Workflow is a place where we can manage things like when an object becomes available for discovery. I said push to discovery here because I'm desperately trying to avoid saying publish. But there are other parts of the object lifecycle that we don't think are likely to be managed very specifically by Comet, like the actual work that's happening in the digitization lab, probably vendor digitization has sometimes maybe a bigger scope, right? Like I might if I'm in the lab, I might put objects into Comet sooner than I can if a vendor is doing a lot of processing. Um, but but in the vendor case, I might just get like a large batch of files that I need to ingest, or a large batch of content that I need to ingest together, and have them start in a pretty different place than they would if I was tracking that work through the lab. Things like creating derivatives can be, I think, are actually creating derivatives, I feel like, is a really good example for the distinction between these two things. So if I'm, say, doing derivative creation that involves some kind of expertise, I'm taking an archival master and I'm transforming it into a production master, and there's some like content specific expertise or like format specific expertise that needs to be applied during that process. It's unlikely that I'm going to make Comet do that work. But if I'm just transcoding a file from like one format to another for generating an access copy, then I'm probably putting that work, delegating that work to Comet, or at least I may be interested in delegating that work to Comet. The other case that might be generally external is if I'm using proprietary external tooling that I can't or just isn't integrated with Comet, that I can't integrate or isn't integrated with. So like a digital forensics workstation, probably any work that's happening there is going to be at most tracked through Comet Workflow and not performed by Comet. So the question, this big question for us is, which parts of the life cycle do we want Comet to be aware of, and to allow us to sort of track as objects move through the process, and which parts do we think are sort of out of its scope. Another way of framing this question is, how early in a content lifecycle should the digital asset management system, the digital object management system, know about this content? I think this is a frame shift a little bit, because I know that in some of our prior platforms, as soon as the object touches the system, we do things like mint permanent IDs, and there's a lot of weight to doing something like that. One of the side effects of putting all of these things into workflow is that we have choices about when we make those kinds of important decisions. Ingesting an object into Comet does not mean straight up that we're minting a permanent ID and publishing it to discovery systems. Oops, I said publish, pushing it to discovery systems. But instead, I may use the workflow to decide when an object is ready for those things. That was a big slide. Let's look at an example workflow. So this is the workflow that was worked up for the geospatial metadata being published. Oops, I said it again. Being pushed out to Shoreline for discovery. So the use case here is really, we want to be able to ingest content in batch at scale, and have a review stage where that content has the opportunity to go through some further edits or be vetted before we make it available for discovery in the Shoreline system. So we start with an action to deposit the item that moves the object to the state in review, and then really from there I have three things that I can do. If I'm a reviewer, I can comment on the object in its current state, and then that just leaves the object in review state. I can request changes so that the object is reassigned to the depositor, who can then comment or make changes and then re-request review. And then last but not least, I can approve the object and move it to sort of the end of this workflow. And when I do that, some side effects happen. I send a notification saying this object is approved. I mint an arc and store it in metadata, and then I initiate the process of pushing the object to shoreline. The published terminology here is actually advised because there's some semantic overload. But if people have questions about that, we can talk about published later. Okay, so that's an example workflow. I want to point out a couple of sort of alternative examples. So again, we're sort of interested in the idea of using these sort of triggered side effects, like minting an arc, to be really thoughtful about when certain behaviors happen during the object lifecycle. So an example of this is with our DCP data sets at UCSD. We have data sets that are associated with a publication. We'd like to get the data object ready and mint the ID so that we can provide the permanent URL to the publisher. But then only later make the data public when the article is actually published. So we'd like to separate the question. Unlike here, we want to separate the question of making the object public versus minting the arc. We want one of those that we want the arc minting to happen at an earlier state in this case. So we might need a different review structure that would make it possible for us to do that, or a different workflow structure that would make it possible for us to do that. Like, this object is ready for an arc. We know that it's real. We're going to track it using a stable identity, but it's not ready to be made available to the public yet. Alternatively, we might want a totally different workflow structure for something like a migration, where the arc is probably already probably already minted by some other system, and I might choose to use the workflow to trigger something like verification that the arc is present, or updating EasyID with submitted metadata upon deposit, rather than having an action that's going to mint a new arc. So those are a couple of variations that you might think about. Okay, so that's our more complicated diagram and some like alternative stuff. Let's talk about what actually goes into a workflow. There are really sort of three core concepts here: states, actions, and roles. And then when I take an action, we have these side effects in the form of notifications, and the terminology that we're going to use for this is triggered operations. So this is like behavior that happens because an object moves from one state to another. Okay, so hang on. Did my speaker notes not make it? That's frustrating. Okay, we're gonna wing it. So a state is like a place where an object rests in the workflow. Every object in a particular workflow is going to be in exactly one state at any given time. And the states effectively decide what the next options are in terms of what can happen to the object. Okay. Actions are really the meat of the thing. Actions are performed by users to transition an object from one state to another. So this is the main like active part of what the workflow engine does is perform actions. When an action is performed, the particular object transitions from one state to a new state, and configured notifications are sent, and any configured triggered operations are performed. The triggered operations can be as simple or as complex as we want. The boundary here is really just like, can this be programmed in a way that's cost effective? Or to put it another way, is this worth automating? Triggered actions triggered operations can be as simple and immediate as something like, we're going to add some metadata to an object or grant access to a particular user. Or they may be very complex and long running, like we're going to enqueue a background job to generate OCR or push content to one or more front ends. And this is another space where we're very interested in feedback from everybody. Where, like, what is it that our that we're interested in having happen because an object moved from one part of a workflow to another? Like, as the object moves through a formal life cycle, do we want automated things to be happening, and what would those be? So far we have a pretty small set of those that we're supporting. We'd love to have a backlog of interesting things that Comet could do to make the management lifecycle easier out there in the library. And then we have roles. Every action is associated with one or more roles, and a given user in the system is either is or isn't associated with the role within a given project's workflow. I'll try to say more about that in a moment, but importantly, if the user has a role that's associated with the action, then they can perform the action. If they don't, they can't. So if in a given project I am a reviewer, then I can perform the actions that are associated with the reviewer role. If I'm not, then somebody else will have to perform those. Notifications are also sent to roles, and that is to say, roles are notified of an action. The roles that are notified of the action don't have to be the same roles that are assigned to it. So I could notify depositors when I approve, and honestly probably should. Okay. Ideally, all of these concepts aren't sort of like redefined and renamed specifically in each given workflow. So by this, I mean like in review as a workflow state, or completed as a workflow state, or deposit and approve as an action, are things that I normally want to be able to like conceptually reuse across different workflows. And the reason for this is that we sort of want there to be a common set of language that we use about what happens during workflow processes, so that when staff members are changing context between one project using a specific workflow and another project using a different workflow, that we are seeing them, and that we're seeing them able to sort of understand the concepts. Sorry, I'm getting notifications that I'm gonna clear off my screen. Okay, so that's what one of the things that we're looking for from you all is to be able to sort of iron out what those concepts need to be. And again, our goal is sort of to make it so that if I'm working in a library, I can on one of the campuses, then I can probably easily move through, move from working in one context, in one project, in one workflow, to a different project and a different workflow, and not be sort of relearning concepts that might have different names for similar things, or same names for very different things. Okay. So I've said some stuff about like project and role context, and I want to take a second to just unpack the project concept, at least as it applies to workflow. So projects are policy groupings of objects, by which I mean projects control some policy level aspects of the objects that are deposited to them. Every object is deposited to a project in Comet, and at least for now, that object will remain in that project for its entire life cycle. There are various side effects of being deposited into a project, like it might affect the default permissions that are applied to that object. But for our purposes, the important policy implication is that each project has an active workflow, and whatever project I'm deposited to as an object decides what workflow I start in. Right, like I move into the initial state of that workflow by being deposited into the project. And then from there, the important thing is that if I'm in a project, that also determines which roles are associated with it, with which users in the workflow that I'm in. So like going back to the diagram, who exactly is a depositor or a reviewer in this workflow depends on which project it's in. So I can make Alice have role depositor in my some digitization project, but make her a reviewer in the vendor ingest project, and have those two projects using the same workflow, but Alice's role within that workflow is different for the two projects. Just briefly, a project isn't meant to be a semantically meaningful grouping, by which I mean being in a project together doesn't mean two objects are related in any way. It doesn't mean they're part of the same collection or anything like that. It just means that from a process standpoint, that I want the same set of users to be able to perform the same set of actions for those objects. And I can change which users are in which roles for which project. So if like somebody retires, I can move them out. If somebody's role in the department changes, I can change which role they're in. But the object will stay related to the project and the workflow, and it's just which specific users will be able to perform the actions that changes. We call them projects sort of to provide a hint about how we want to think about using them. So if a new group of users is going to work together on moving some set of objects through a workflow, that's probably a new project. They could be long-running projects like image digitization in the DLD lab. That's probably not a good like succinct project name, but you get the idea, right? Like who the lab staff is decides who's going to be doing what within that context. And or they could be short-lived, like I know I've got such and such collection that's being I keep going back to the vendor digitization example, but that's like been digitized by a vendor, and I'm probably going to wrap up the project whenever that process is over for that collection. So this is just a view of the like project concept in Comet. You can see here that there's a few objects that have been deposited into this project, and that they're in different states in review and completed depending on where they are in the workflow, towards the bottom right. And I can change which workflow is available to which project, or is active in which project, by editing the project. So normally what I would do is I would set up a project, select one of the workflows that's deployed in my campus deployment of Comet, and then that probably keep that static for the lifetime of the project. Okay. So what I'd like to do now is break us off into groups, and work on this prompt in breakout rooms. So let's imagine that we're ready to migrate some existing content into Comet. Depending on who's in your group, you might want to be a little specific about what you have in mind when you think of where you're migrating content from. So it could be like, I'm moving content from the existing UCSD dams, or from ADRL, or from digitization shared drive where objects are coming off scanner onto disk somewhere. And I want us to think about what workflow I could use to manage this process, what it would look like, what states, actions, and roles the workflow would have, and what triggered operations might be automated within it. If we can draw diagrams, I think that's great. There's a whiteboard feature set in the Zoom breakout rooms that I encourage you to use, and we'll sort of like capture the output. And then I'd like to start by doing that for 10 minutes, and then maybe we can come back and report out about how things are shook out for the various groups. Gabriella, can you help me break people into groups?
Yeah, so we have 19 people here. How many rooms do you want? I'm going to pre-assign people.
Yeah, can we what, 19 means 4 people a group if there's 5 rooms, give or take?
Sure.
Let's make 5 rooms.
Sure. And then folks, remember to use the whiteboards. It'll save after you exit the rooms. How long do you want to stay in the rooms, Tamsin?
I want to stay for 10 minutes, but actually 12.
12 minutes. Okay.
And then while she was talking out loud, Kibi was like translating into a diagram. I was in awe.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Gabriella, are you able, while we hear report outs, to capture the various whiteboards? Just want to make sure that those artifacts get saved.
Ours might not be worth saving.
We're going to save it anyway.
It was hard to
Arlen,
do it quick. We were like struggling just with the UI, you know.
Can you all see your whiteboards? I'm loading mine. Let's see what I see.
I think we have 2 minutes for each team to report out. And I would like to ask a volunteer to go first.
I volunteer Miyuki.
Thanks, Thor.
FYI, I don't see the whiteboards
too. Gabriella, I can see them all. I'll capture them.
Awesome, thank you.
Thor, I'm going to ask you to volunteer somebody else after we hear from your team for 2 minutes.
I'm good at that.
Let's go with room 1. That was Abby, David, Michael, and Longshoe. Abby, do you feel brave enough to report out?
Is it possible to display it?
Oh, let's see. So you can share screen. I don't know if you can display your whiteboard. Try.
I think anyone can select a whiteboard to display at this point,
yeah, it's loading.
But I can't tell which ones are which.
I think I just accidentally loaded ours. I was going to see if I could change it.
Oh.
You're going to report out, Arwen. Tell us about it.
Wait a second.
So that's room 2, Arwen, Jessica, Ron, and Vivian.
Okay, this is not good. Okay, I'll try to do it on the fly. Oh, now how do we get back there? Presenting? Okay. Oh, maybe it won't let me edit. Okay, well, this is really badly formatted. So we took the idea was based off the Holocaust Living History Workshop content, but I think might be generalizable to other collections. But basically, it's a series of videos of events on campus. The series is planned out at the beginning of the year, and then over the course of the year they happen. And at some point we get videos from the video files from UCTV. So the workflow idea was we could create stub records at the beginning of the year with all the, basic metadata. So the title of the series, the people involved, all of that stuff, the date it's going to happen. Once we get the video, it's then added to that stub record that's already created. It then goes to our subject specialist for Jewish studies, who creates some description. She does some keywords and some description. That then comes to, this is a little abnormal in that I do then some additional cataloging, which I don't usually do, plus metadata normalization. Once that's complete, it goes to the project. Oh, sorry, I should have said the file video upload is usually done by the project manager. It then goes back to the project manager for review, and then once it's done, it gets pushed to discovery. Sorry, I'm trying to update.
Sorry, you're allowed to say published if you want.
Habits and anyway. So, like I said, we were. It was hard to do it all with the boxes and things, and we don't have the states. We didn't get to talk about the states. Talked a little about the.
You mostly talked about actions and roles.
Actions and roles. There is also a possible little side action where if there's a problem with the video, we get not a problem necessarily, but they sometimes come with the bars and the sound squealing or something that you get at the beginning of videos. Then we'll request from reformatting, Miyuki in particular, to get a second chopped what do you call it version.
Fantastic.
Derivative.
I want to move us to another team so we can hear everybody. Gabriella, can you just select another whiteboard and we'll make somebody talk? Oh, Gabriella, you're talking now, but I can't hear you.
Since
'cause you're muted.
you're sharing, it's your, I think it's you have that can share the whiteboard. I don't see them.
Okay.
Do it. Do you want me to grab one?
You can see them, Arwen?
Somebody else's? Or might not.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
I think you probably can too, Gabriella, but let's not get hung up on it.
Yes, I can talk about ours. So we were focusing mostly on automated processes that would happen if we have an existing collection as we're bringing it into Comet. Thing like checking for ARCs to see if they already exist, crosswalking over the metadata from the old schema into the Comet schema, pulling the files over and conforming them to the hierarchical structure that Hyrax can handle. And then pulling over administrative data that was in the old system. And we weren't sure if this would either be like crosswalked into the new administrative metadata, or if they were somehow not crosswalkable, that we could just like park that information somewhere, like even in, metadata fields or something like that to keep it. And that role would be the depositor. And then we started talking about, okay, then what's the review process look like? And didn't get a lot written down about that, but let's just started talking about what kinds of reviews would need to happen.
I heard like a proposal when I was floating into the room about having 2 different stages of review with a sort of metadata review process and a curator doing final approval. Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool. I'm gonna do another whiteboard. Oh, this is all Chrissy, and is this still somebody's whiteboard here?
Yeah, that's ours.
Wow.
Dang, Kimmy.
That's nice.
Jeez Louise.
So impressed.
This is what I was talking about.
What's going on? This looks implementable.
How did y'all do
Right?
that?
Done.
I didn't talk, so I just did the whiteboard.
All right.
Thor and I talked a lot and disappeared. Okay, I can get started and then maybe Thor jump in what I'm missing. This is a scenario where I, as the person who has digitized the film scan, uploads the file into a share and gets deposited into Comet. Metadata is reviewed when a set of files are uploaded. They're wrangled and reviewed by a few folks. And at times, a request for a better source file has been requested for things that are already in our collection. And then what is sitting at the bottom of the metadata review is kind of describing a sort of a process where it goes through a review, a process when a new source file is provided. And derivatives are generated upon ingest right now. And derivative review occurs with project members if it is part of a existing digital project. Goes through a similar review cycle again, and it gets approved, and then end users checks content out to make sure things are all kosher. Anything else to add here?
You mentioned the difference between multiple kinds of masters in that second derivative review.
Yes. So what really resonated me earlier when Tamsin was talking about an example about archival master and production master is really relevant to this scenario, especially with film scans, thinking about the raw DPX scans and the production encoded master file, for example. So that would be a case of 2 sort of source or master files going into Comet. And yeah, we were just kind of chatting about how that review process would look like for, 2 file sets, if that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, that's really cool. We've also had conversation on our side about like in what circumstances we would save raw raw camera capture files versus a production master. Neat.
Great.
Nice work.
Mhm.
There's one more team. Which board is it that I want to capture? Is this the right one?
We're group 1, so maybe. Yep, that's us. Yeah, I'm just thinking about research content and really kind of copying what they did with the GIS stuff. I mean, we just imagine a transfer and imagine this is a very similar workflow to what we have now, where the metadata analyst would review the metadata and the data. I would imagine they'd make sure files are downloadable, that kind of thing, make any changes to address issues that they find. And when those are ready, actually, I think we need an arrow that could go back over, that could go to the curator. So someone who is like a project manager, they would review their project to make sure everything looks okay. If they find issues, and they would send it, request changes, and the metadata analyst would implement those changes. It will go back to the curator again for them to check, make sure everything was implemented okay. If it was okay, then that object would be ready to roll.
Neat. Fantastic. Really, really nice output from everybody. Thank you for your engagement. We're past the hour, so I want to go ahead and let people go. And but I can stay for just a little bit. So if there's like stuff that people are chomping at the bit to talk about or ask about or what have you, then we can do that. But let's stop the recording and say thank you, everybody, for being here and being so cool and engaged.
It was great. Thanks, Tamsin.
Thank you. This is really
Tamsin,
helpful.
what a great workshop. Thank you so
Yep.
much.
Really helpful.
Whee!
Thank you. This is amazing.
Yeah, thanks.